Anyone can make this dogman cake using nothing but buttercream and parchment paper or wax paper, with the magic of layered buttercream, no fondant needed. Step 1 is to make your cake. Of course, you can use any flavour for your cake. This is my 8-inch berry vanilla cake with 3 layers of cake. And I'm using my 4-minute buttercream as the filling between the layers, mixed with cinnamon and cream cheese for a snickerdoodle flavour. 1 batch of my 4-minute buttercream is the perfect amount to fill, frost and decorate an 8-inch cake. Set aside about half a cup of the buttercream to make dogman, covering it with plastic wrap so it doesn't dry out and crust, and use the rest to frost the cake. I'm tinting mine with sky blue gel and applying a crumb coat first. In case you're new to cake decorating, a crumb coat is a thin layer of frosting to catch any crumbs that come off the cake, and they'll get trapped in this layer. It doesn't need to be super smooth, it just needs to cover the whole cake to trap all of the crumbs. It's easiest to frost a cold cake, so put the layers in the fridge for 30 minutes or the freezer for 15 minutes before you do this. When the crumb coat is fairly smooth, put the cake back into the fridge or freezer for 15 to 30 minutes. When you take it out, the crumb coat should be cold and firm, not sticky. So now when you spread on your final layer of frosting, it will sit on top of the crumb coat instead of mixing into it. And the crumbs will be trapped in the crumb coat, so you'll have no visible crumbs on your frosted cake. Put the cake back into the fridge to set the frosting, but first, measure how big you want your dogman character to be. Mine will be 5 inches tall to leave room for candles and a name on the cake. Print off your image of Dogman to be the size you chose. Next, step 2 is to make your Dogman stencils. This is so simple and will create an accurate replica of the character, very affordably and with no special tools. Simply trace all of the details of the character onto pieces of parchment or wax paper, using 1 piece of paper for each colour. So the yellow parts of the hat and shirt will both go onto this piece. You'll need a stencil for every detail except lines and dots like the facial features. Even the grass down here needs a stencil, and I'm not going to include the buildings on the skyline or the tennis ball, but if you were going to, you'd need separate stencils for those. When you layer the stencils over each other, you should have every detail of the character there. Now the details need to be cut out, but you don't need the details, you're only going to use the paper around them. So cut a little slit in the middle of each shape and poke a scissor blade through, and cut around the shape, leaving the paper around it intact. The more neatly you cut out the shapes, with smooth instead of jagged edges, the neater those shapes will be on the character on your cake. Once your cake is cold and the frosting is firm, ideally after at least an hour in the fridge, it's time to layer the stencils. Start with the background, the grass for me, or the buildings if you're including those, and after positioning the stencil on the cake, press it down while you spread buttercream over it. This is leftover blue frosting with a drop of leaf green gel and a drop of yellow. Spread away from the stencil to seal it against the cake. Because if you spread towards the stencil, you'll push buttercream underneath it and cause smudges on the cake. This stencil is unique because it's not a shape surrounded by paper. So the buttercream is going to go over the edge of the cake, but that's fine. I'll show you how easy it is to fix next, because the frosting on the cake is cold and firm. Smooth the frosting over the stencil, scraping a few times with an offset spatula or palette knife until there's a smooth, thin layer of buttercream left, and then peel off the stencil. Scrape around the side of the cake to take off the excess green buttercream and leave a smooth edge around the cake. And now the cake needs to go into the fridge for about 15 minutes to set the green buttercream before positioning the next stencil. The order of your stencils is really important. You need to start with the background details and layer them with the details that get closer and closer to the foreground. I'm doing the head and hands next, since those are going to be covered with clothes. This stencil is the trickiest because to know where the head needs to be, I have to position the other stencils first, because I don't want Dogman to be floating up in the sky or his feet to be sticking out down below the bottom edge of the cake. To make this dog fur coloured buttercream, I used yellow and added brown, just a tiny amount, by dipping a toothpick into the bottle and then dragging it through the yellow buttercream. The stencils should have about 1 inch or 2 centimetres of paper around the edge of each shape, so that you don't spread any buttercream over the edge of the stencil by mistake. If you do, as you're scraping and smoothing the buttercream, it's easy to fix since the cake is cold, because you can just scrape off any smudges with a toothpick, and you won't damage the cold, firm frosting underneath. Repeat the process with the rest of your stencils, chilling the cake after using each stencil to set the buttercream so you don't damage it with the next stencil. The thinner the layer of buttercream you spread over each stencil, the neater the edges of those shapes will be. But to layer light colours over dark colours, like this yellow over blue, you'll need a thicker layer so that the yellow properly covers up the blue. Here are my stencils in the order I used them. Leave any tiny details for the end and pipe them on using a piping bag with a small round piping tip, like a number 3, or a sandwich bag with a tiny piece cut off one corner, which you can use just like a piping bag. For the white fleck in each eye, I'm using a piping bag with a tiny piece cut off the end to make a tiny hole. If you're making the book version of Dogman, you can pipe outlines around all of the details, but for the movie version, you don't need them, which is lucky since piping is such a challenge for me. So, a buttercream version of Dogman, traced onto paper and then transferred onto the cake by layering homemade stencils. What do you think? I'd love to hear in the comments. And for more cake decorating techniques and designs, visit my cake school on britishgirlbakes.com. Thanks for watching.